Hey, Learn English 11 Days over here, welcoming you to another episode of Thrill, Suspense, and Adventure. This time we are back with an Indian Assamese film called Aamis. But before diving in, let me warn you, there are spoilers ahead. So watch out and take care. Like every normal Indian movie, this storyline also begins at an ordinary point. People eating their food in a camp, a mother playing with her son, and a rickshaw driver preparing to sleep. They share no common points, and it looked like they were quite happy in their own world. The next morning, the scene opens up at the clinic of Dr. Nirmali Saikia. She is a pediatrician who owns a tiny clinic near the alley. She was having her regular tea while assisting her son with his homework when a guy rushed in. This guy, Suman, asked for her help for his friend who was ill. Nirmali tried to reason with him and told him that the clinic was shut and the fact that she treats children, but Suman insisted on her presence. Finally, Dr. Nirmali gave in and went with him to help. Suman and Rajesh were part of the camping trip that has been showcased in the first scene. Everyone had the same meal, but Rajesh fell ill the very next day. His face had turned green, he was puking continuously, and had also got loose motion. Nirmali hurriedly reached his house and checked on him. She came to know that Rajesh had eaten meat for the first time. He liked it so much that he overate and fell into this condition. Dr. Nirmali diagnosed him with indigestion, asked Suman to prepare ORS powder for him, wrote some medicines for him, and left. Suman accompanied her to her house. On the way, he told her about the Meat Eaters Club, a union of students with like-minded people from his university who believed in purchasing a living animal, slaughtering it, and enjoying its meat. This helps them keep an eye on checking up the quality of the meat before consuming it. In fact, they had bought a goat for camping yesterday. Dr. Nirmali was quite interested in the idea and asked for a portion of the meat to try out before entering her house. The next day, after winning a university match, Suman shared everything with one of his seniors, Elias. Nirmali spends the entire day with her best friend, Jumi. Their life was no longer connected in any way possible. One day, Elias asks Suman to go to a plantation garden with him. They had caught a large number of wild rabbits and had asked Elias to sterilize them. In addition, they also promised him a rabbit lunch. Suman gladly accepts the offer and on his way back brings some for Dr. Nirmali, as he had promised. They ate together at the clinic. Nirmali had never tasted rabbits before, so she was quite surprised by their delicacy and softness. Suman asks Nirmali to eat the flesh with her own hands, but Nirmali refuses on the ground that she had a mental block. She was scared of getting infected. Dr. Nirmali started asking Suman about his life. Suman was a research scholar in the Department of Anthropology. He was recently researching meat-eating habits for the northeastern states. The meat club was a part of his interest. At night, during the club meeting, Suman remained stuck with his phone chatting with Dr. Nirmali. He was immersed in their conversation to the extent that he ignored a girl who was trying to hit on him. He went out of the area and found a quiet spot near a tree in a deserted road and continued their conversation. Days passed by. Their conversation grew deeper. They started sharing their happiness and woes. It reached a point when they started traveling and going out to different dining areas together. Both had similar tastes for food, and so they bonded over the lunch and dinner tales. Moreover, trying out different types of cuisines gave them excitement and anticipation at the same time. But with time, their feelings grew intense. They started falling for each other. Dr. Nirmali knew that it was wrong, but she couldn't help it. She loved spending time with him and eating out with him. One day, Jumi visits Nirmali while she was having a migraine. Jumi asks Nirmali about the reason she had started to spend less time with her. Their phone calls had grown shorter and they had stopped hanging out with each other. Nirmali tried changing the subject, but Jumi got the idea. She concluded that Nirmali was having an affair. When Nirmali taunted her, she prepared to leave. That was when Nirmali first shared her feelings about Suman with Jumi. She admits hanging out with him and going to places to eat unusual meat dishes. Moreover, she confesses that she has developed feelings for him, but she feels it was wrong for her to reciprocate them. She announces her decision to stop seeing him for a while. But she breaks her promise within a few days when they went to watch a drama together. In between, One of the audience members sleeping amid the loud noise woke up suddenly. Nirmali laughed out loud, looking at him, and came out of the hall. Suman offers to take her to eat meat, but Nirmali politely refuses, given her husband was coming back the next day. Suman also excused himself with lots of pending work on him, saying there was no point in all of this. He was hurt, Nirmali knew that, but there was nothing she could do. Nirmali returned home late at night to find her husband already back. He hugged her tightly and told her how much he missed her. He had brought yam from the village, but Nirmali had lost her appetite. Dilip held her hands, but she loosened his grip and went towards the kitchen. She was craving meat. It looked like the meat had turned into her addiction. She took out a few pieces from her fridge and started consuming them. Dilip stood there shocked. Later in bed, Dilip started telling her about his work, but Nirmali was not interested in his words at all. She tells him about Suman and Dilip asks her to invite him over for dinner. Nirmali smiles. The scene shifts to a few days later when Suman decides to go to his hometown for a few days. Elias comes with him to drop him off. He advises him not to be obsessed with a married woman and focus on his studies. Suman calls it his love for her, but Elias tries to convince him that it was nothing but an illicit affair. Suman tells him that he hasn't even touched Dr. Nirmali by mistake because he was scared to lose everything he had with her now. He was on his way when Nirmali asked him to join their family for a get-together at 7 p.m. Suman, madly in love with her, dropped the idea of going to his house and got off the van without a second thought. Suman hurriedly rushed towards his room, pressed his best clothes, and prepared to go to the party. On the other hand, Nirmali started preparing his favorite dishes for him with her own hands. At sharp 7 p.m., Suman reached her house. He was invited in by Piku, Nirmali's son. Nirmali introduced him to everyone, including Jumi and Dilip. He was feeling a little shy when Nirmali left him in the men's hall and went out to check the meat. In the hall, Dilip kept talking about his work and how he had managed to save lives and rescue people. Suman tried to interrupt but failed. Later, he went to the bathroom and, while coming out, found Nirmali's clothes. He started touching them softly and was going to kiss them when someone knocked on the door. He comes out and joins the male guests and Dilip again. The guests were still talking about Dilip and how he could win a national award for his contribution to society. But Suman was not involved in that conversation at all. Nirmali entered the room asking everyone to have dinner, while others cheered for the couple. A pang of jealousy strikes Suman, while guilt covers Nirmali's eyes. While dining in the living room, Suman describes how the taste of meat varies from person to person in their region itself. According to his department, people consume all kinds of meat, including wild animals, lizards, snakes, weaver ants, and more.
A few days passed by. Dilip prepared to leave. Though he had arrived only a week before, an urgent project called for his assistance, and he decided to go back. A heated argument followed, and Nirmali went out of the room. She reached the balcony, sat down on the chair, and tried to distract her mind with the phone. She stared at Suman's WhatsApp profile for a while, then got prepared and left without speaking a word to Dilip. He was astounded as he kept asking her, as well as Meena, their maid, about her whereabouts. Even Meena had no idea about that. We find out that Nirmali had gone out to meet Suman. She asks him about his weird meat-eating habits and whether he had consumed any of them. Suman refuses, but says he would love to have them. He offers her bat meat lunch, which she gladly accepts. Suman calls Elias to ask him if he could take his car, while Nirmali asks Jumi to lie to Dilip that they had gone to watch a drama together. Jumi laughs and agrees to that to protect her. Suman and Nirmali went to a plantation to have the meat. It was a tiny, open-air place. They ate food in silence while stealing some glances at each other and came back. The journey was quite peaceful. On the way, Nirmali asked Suman to drop her off halfway, and she went back hurriedly. Reaching her house, she kissed Dilip. He was taken aback and asked her the reason behind her action. But she went inside without saying anything. Suman kept thinking about Nirmali for the entire evening. While having lunch at the restaurant, Nirmali had something stuck on her face. She couldn't find it and leaned in to get Suman's help. Suman pointed it out, but as soon as he was about to touch her, Nirmali moved back. Suman couldn't help but think about that incident. He shared his experiences with Elias and convinced himself that Nirmali loved him in the same way. Elias was frustrated with listening to his thoughts. He called Sumon a desperate guy and a useful idiot who Nirmali was just using for adding spice to her dull life. But Sumon was not in a condition to understand these words anymore. He was madly in love with Nirmali. At night, he had a quite strange dream about Nirmali. Elias shakes him up and wakes him at midnight. With eyes half closed, he declares his decision of feeding her his flesh. Meanwhile, Dilip leaves town while Nirmali stares at him coldly from the balcony. Sumon asked Elias for his help to cut down a sample of meat out of himself in the name of research. Sumon neither had the experience, tools, nor the OT for the action. Elias ignored him for a while, but finally agreed to do so. At the operation theater, Elias asked Sumon to open his pants. He injected him with anesthesia and cut up a small piece of meat for him. After the surgery, he went back to his quarters, prepared a dish with it, and went to Nirmali's clinic. He asked Bora, her driver, and receptionist to give it to her right then. But he asked him to wait and give it to her himself. Nirmali was busy with a patient. But Sumon kept insisting that Bora should give it to her at the exact moment. Finally, Bora gave in and went to give her the food. Sumon waited outside for a while. Bora came out sometime later and informed him that he had kept the food on the table as she was busy. Sumon was satisfied. He went out. But he kept thinking about why Nirmali didn't meet him. He apologized to her for upsetting her inadvertently. At night, Nirmali comes back from the clinic and asks for meat. Meena was surprised that her mistress was asking about meat every day. She suggested eating up the dish prepared by Sumon. Nirmali asked her to bring it up. She absent-mindedly took a few bites but was consumed by their flavor. She felt free after a long time. She had never tasted something like this before. She asked Sumon about what meat he had added to the dish, but he refused to tell her on the chat. The next day, they met at a coffee house where Nirmali asked Sumon about where he had found something with such an exquisite taste. Sumon hesitantly told her the truth. Nirmali grew serious after listening to everything and went out angrily. She tried to throw it up, but it was in vain. Finally, she sobbed silently as she felt guilty for how much she enjoyed eating it the night before. Sumon caught up with her and tried to explain everything to her. But Nirmali wasn't ready to listen to anything and shut him up before he could say anything. Back at her home, Nirmali freaked out and kept washing up her mouth with the mouth freshener. But soon she stopped thinking about it and asked Sumon for more. Sumon gladly agreed to help her.
Finally, she sobbed silently as she felt guilty for how much she enjoyed eating it the night before. Sumon caught up with her and tried to explain everything to her. But Nirmali wasn't ready to listen to anything and shut him up before he could say anything. Back at her home, Nirmali freaked out and kept washing up her mouth with the mouth freshener. But soon she stopped thinking about it and asked Sumon for more. Sumon gladly agreed to help her. One after another, he kept cutting small parts of his body to prepare meals for her. He would ask Elias to cut the meat, prepare the food himself, and deliver it to her hospital secretly. Sumon's dedication and Nirmali's hunger kept intensifying over time, and love between them had turned into an unhealthy obsession. One was ready to sacrifice himself for his beloved, and another was ready to consume him until nothing was left. Once, Nirmali cut off a piece of her own flesh and prepared a dish for Sumon. But Sumon started throwing up when he came to know that he was actually eating Nirmali's flesh. But Nirmali enjoyed it. In fact, she had now reached a point where eating a few pieces of his meat was not enough for her. She wanted more, a well-cooked cuisine bursting with a similar flavor. Nirmali couldn't sleep the entire night thinking about the meat. Even in the morning, she kept waiting for Sumon to bring her lunch. Her hunger grows to the extent that she started hallucinating. She asked Sumon if any restaurant served fresh human meat. Sumon replied that when she had got his body, why should she care to go out? But Nirmali didn't want him to suffer. Later, at Elias's clinic, Sumon asked Elias to cut off his toe for him. He was to do a desk job for the rest of his life, so he thought that having a toe was quite useless for him. Elias had heard that Sumon had been cooking in his quarters for a long time. So he asked him clearly what he and Nirmali are up to. He scolded him for cutting up his body parts and calling it love. He warned him that this was the last time he was going to help him do this. Suman got scared. Without Elias, he would never find a way to feed his flesh to Nirmali. So, he asks him to cut off a sample from the regular spot. Here also comes a spine-chilling creepy dialogue that Suman speaks out to Elias. I wasn't exactly lying. I am experimenting to find out other ways of getting physical with my beloved. But, his strange romantic confession of love for Nirmali goes to vain. Elias denies being a part of his body-cutting project and asks him to go to his parents' house to clear his head. Suman didn't budge from his decision and picked up a tool to cut himself. Elias jumped on Suman to stop him from taking the wrong step. After struggling for a few seconds, he managed to snatch the tool out of his hands and slapped him hard. A few seconds of silence surrounded the room. Suman looked at Elias innocently for a while and went out. He messaged Nirmali that he won't bring her meat that day. But, on the way he gets a call from her. She asks him to come to the hospital urgently. Desperately, she waits for him in the parking lot. After Suman arrives, Nirmali takes him secretly to the basement of the hospital, into the morgue. There was an unclaimed body over there that came in a few hours earlier. It was an accident case, so there was no chance of getting infected. She asked Suman to cut a few pieces out of it and cook them. Suman stared at her in horror and disbelief. Nirmali took out a blade and told him to cut a few pieces out of his legs and arm. Suman asked her to be patient and cut him off instead. But Nirmali was tired of living off his pathetic tidbits. She wanted more. She stubbornly kept asking him to cut off the victim. But, just then, a hospital staff member enters the room. Fearing he might hear this unusual conversation, Suman asks Nirmali to get out of the room. Nirmali angrily leaves. Later, at a restaurant, Nirmali realizes that she had gone insane. Suman tries to calm her down and blames himself for her condition. Nirmali asks him to help her, but he didn't know what to do. Nirmali asked him to walk her home. On the way home, Nirmali discloses that she is suffering from acute addiction. She could either struggle with it for months, years, maybe forever, or she could have her fill and get over it. She chose the latter one. She needed to get it out of her system before the fear consumes her completely. Everyone around her had felt her addiction towards meat. She wanted to fight it before it got out of her hands. Suman decided to bring her the meat. He was the one to start this, and he believed he should be the one to finish it too. Nirmali goes back home. Suman purchases a knife. Once in her clinic, Nirmali prepares for the operation and messages Suman to bring only the leg and arm to her. Suman sat on a bench near the footpath while sipping his tea and stared at everyone to find his first and last target. He hired a hand-pulled rickshaw to travel back to his quarters. He stops the rickshaw halfway. Slowly, he looks around to see if anybody was noticing him. The rickshaw driver drops his cloth and bends down to pick it up. Suman took it as a chance. He swiftly took out a knife from his bag and attacked him from the back. In a fight that followed, Suman had to struggle for a while. He lost his knife, but, finally, he managed to get hold of his neck and suffocates him. For an innocent old man, that was painful. Suman pulled him into the nearby dark alley and started cutting him into pieces. Just then, the police van arrives in the neighborhood. Suman, unaware of this fact, continues his work. An officer, pissing on the road, listens to the sound of chopping coming from nearby and goes to check. Unfortunately, he notices Suman cutting the rickshaw driver and calls him out. Suman freaked out and started running away, but he is caught and is taken into custody. At the police station, Suman received a call from Nirmali. The call was cut, but the police started digging into their connection through their chats. Suman tried to resist, but it proved to be useless. The police had already got a hint that Nirmali was somehow involved in the murder case. Meanwhile, Nirmali sleeps on her balcony while waiting for Suman. Meena woke her up in the morning and asked her to drop Piku as it was late for his school. On the way back, police arrested Nirmali. The news of a female cannibal in the town spread like wildfire. Elias listens to the news on the television and rushes to help Suman. But it was too late. The movie ended with Nirmali and Suman standing in the railway station, holding their hands with their faces covered.